First of all, I would like to welcome you all for being with us today. This is Manal Makki, the project manager at Mefosa. I will be presenting each speaker for our session today. I will start off with Dr. Nabil Fahad, the chairman and CEO of Fahad Group, comprising import, distribution, retail, and real estate development companies. He is currently the president of the syndicate of supermarket owners, vice chairman, treasurer of the Chamber of Commerce of Beirut and Mount Lebanon. Dr. Nabil Fahad will be starting off with opening remarks and will say about today. Dr. Nabil, the floor is yours.
As Manal mentioned, Fahad Group has an import markets, and of course that gives me an insight about the whole or a big part of the supply chain from outside countries into Lebanon to the end consumer. I've had the opportunity to participate in the recovery or the planning and preparation of part of the recovery plan that the government has presented last year, and which was not implemented or was not actually approved. So I will probably have comments that are maybe I would say maybe a bit harsh on that subject, but let me be a bit again candid and say that a lot or a big part of the recovery plan had to be changed and will be changing now as a year and a half has passed, and many changes have taken place in our financial situation, monetary situation, and of course economics and social situation. The challenges that I would say that we are facing are multifaceted. At the core of it, of course, is the huge deficit in the balance of payment that has precipitated the decline of the Lebanese pound as a result of the lack of capital inflows into the country, and the response that we have seen from the central bank to create multiple exchange rates. And I think this is one of the main problems that we are facing in our economy and in the commercial sector, to see 5 or 6 exchange rates for the pound vis-a-vis the dollar and other currencies. Of course, add to that the lack of reforms, add to that the security problems that we've seen, the Beirut explosion, yesterday's explosion in Akkar, all the demonstrations and the road closings. All of these are contributing to an interruption of our economic activities. And of course, it is creating a lot of social unrest. Add to that some US sanctions on some of our politicians, and we really have a huge obstacle to overcome. Now, if I want to go into our sector, into the food sector, I would say that the main challenge that we were facing at the beginning of the economic problems or economic crisis was the collapsing working capital of companies. That was a huge problem, and it has been exacerbated, as I said, by multiple exchange rates, by deteriorating free exchange rate, losing 12 times, the pound losing 12 times of its value. And of course, we cannot forget about Corona. But if we set that aside and focus on what the food industry has faced in the past year, and one of also the biggest problems was the subsidy program. The fact that companies got into a subsidy program also made it very difficult for them to maintain their working capital. They lost their part of their working capital, and now they are facing again losses on their working capital because they are not being paid by the central bank as promised. At another level, of course, food security is very important, I think, to us, and I think this is also a topic for discussion. The availability of food products, of course, has diminished because sourcing has become quite difficult, also because of Corona, as well as the lack of foreign exchange in Lebanon. The supply chain has been interrupted again by decisions by the government regarding Corona. If you all remember, in winter, at the high of the Corona pandemic spread, a lot of retailers were forced to close, a lot of manufacturers, industries were forced to close. Of course, distribution companies were forced to close. Again, the supply chain was interrupted, and as we all know, it takes months for this supply chain to get back on track and work efficiently again. Another issue that we've been facing for the past couple of months again, and maybe it is also worth discussing, is the availability of diesel oil, mazout, for generating electricity, for running distribution trucks. Again, that is interrupting the supply chain severely. And when we look at the number of problems and the challenges that we are facing, it's really a very momentous situation. It is going to be very difficult to untangle all of these issues, and I hope that the webinar will allow us to discuss a lot of these issues that I have talked about, and I hope that we are going to have, as I said, a very open and candid discussion of these issues, and I thank you for giving me the time to outline all of these challenges that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabil.
Thank you, Dr. Nabil. With us to take questions and comments from the audience. We also urge the rest of the speakers, Mr. Atif and Dr. Michel, to share their material.
Anna, I have a question. Nabil, I have a question to you, if I may. You have been witnessing. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, Dr. Nabil, you are an economist and you work in the food business. You have been witnessing for the last year and a half a lot of hear and say on what is a good practice in delivering food for people. We have heard your opening speech, and you were very clear on the confusion that the consumer is going through due to multiple exchange rates. And what we're trying to impress on everybody today is how can we focus on core issues before addressing all these issues of Lebanese rates against current customs or against depositors, or should we follow the market exchange rate? Do you feel a more stable currency that is pegged to the dollar can deliver on same? And in follow-up on Dr. Sarkis Khouri's presentation, do you feel the four main drivers of the economy he posed, consider particularly the earnings that are needed in export currencies, the earnings that are needed in clearing up our tourism, and the need of better addressing our export communities and diaspora? Are these some of the issues that you're looking at as an economist, not only a retailer?
Yes, to start with, I think what we've been doing over the past year and a half is just trying to delay the inevitable. And the inevitable is to go to a total flotation of the exchange rate vis-a-vis the dollar and other hard currencies. Of course, you recall, and probably many of the attendees would recall what has happened in the late 80s and early 90s, when all of this did not exist, all of these multiple rates, all of this confusion, all of the smuggling of products across the border, the hoarding, everything that we've been witnessing over the past year and a half as a result of multiple exchange rate and subsidy program of the government. All of these did not exist. We, at that time, we moved directly into a floating exchange rate, and we achieved a balance in the economy very quickly. Of course, the size of the problem was much smaller, and of course, it meant that the impact on the population was less severe. Now we have a much bigger economy, and obviously the impact is very, very difficult to absorb in a short period of time. I think if we had planned to use this exchange rate, multiple exchange rate mechanism to put us on a track for a floating exchange rate in order to create this balance in the economy that we all know will give the consumer or the people their rights in terms of just paying what is required to pay, not pay more, and of course not pay less, because if they pay more, it means that the importers and retailers are making more money than they should be. And if they pay less, it means that the retailer and the importer are losing their capital. And this is exactly what we have witnessed in the intervals where we saw the sudden jump in the exchange rate. We had four of these jumps over the past year and a half, from 2,000 to 3,000, that's a 50% jump. Then from 3,000 to 7,000, that was more than 100% jump. Then from 7,000 to 12,000, then from 12 to 18, and lately from 18 to 22, and now we are back to 18,000 Lebanese pounds of dollars. So in every loss of the local currency or increase in the value of the dollar, the ones who have been paying the most are the importers, followed by the retailers, and lastly the consumer. And in that order, the loss have been paid. Of course, I'm not saying that the consumers are not suffering. We can say that the impact on the consumer or on the people in Lebanon is tremendous, because they cannot adjust their income, their salary, and their purchasing power suffering. Of course, what the importers and retailers have suffered in relative terms is also too large, but of course, given the situation, the financial situation of many of them, maybe they can last longer than what the consumers can. Now, in relation to Dr. Khouri's issue of the PEG, of course, if you want an extension of what I'm saying, the PEG, of course, has hurt us. It has allowed us to live beyond our means because of the higher standard of living, because of the higher valuation of the Lebanese pound. And of course, throughout history, Lebanon has had always balance of payment problems. And if we look at our current account has always been negative. and it only becomes positive, and our balance of payments, reaches a balance when capital inflows come into the country, like what we have witnessed in 2009. Around $21 billion flowed into the country as a result of the international financial crisis. So I cannot see that we can really create the balance from the additional export of goods. We have to really look at the export of goods as well as the export of services, as well as income from tourism, and to add to it the inflow that comes from expatriates. So all of this, formula of flows will lead us to a balanced situation. Of course, when there is confidence, and now that we lack the confidence in the political system, in the governance system, that is, I think, a very impossible situation that we are in. That is why we have always said, in order to regain this confidence, we have to engage in an International Monetary Fund program in order to bring back the capital flows into the country, in order for us to be able to manage a little bit over time our dollar needs until the economy is revived again.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask Dr. Nabil Fahd his views on same. Do you feel a currency board, Dr. Fahd, will help address some of these concerns?
I think the currency board has been presented, I think, at the wrong time. I agree that with you that it might be helpful under certain circumstances, but at this point in time, one of the main requirements and major needs of a currency board is to have a certain amount of foreign currency reserves to stabilize the level of the Lebanese pound at a certain level. And of course, that is not available now. I think after we get into a program with the IMF, after we reach a certain level of confidence, and there are accumulated foreign currency at the central bank that can be used to defend the Lebanese pound and stabilize it, then a currency board at the central bank or independent of the central bank as a mechanism of monitoring this level of exchange rate would be successful, and of course would create a lot of stability. But I think doing it at this point in time would not be of any help, and unfortunately, the situation requires major foreign currency inflows into the country to create the stability. And of course, I mean, I would look at the current structure of the central bank as a kind of a currency board. Now, maybe we'll have a different governance for a currency board as adjustments in some of its flows. But in the end, we have what we call the Central Committee of the Central Bank, Al-Majlis Al-Markazi, is effectively something synonymous to a currency board if it uses its prerogatives and if it works according to the law of money and credit and to a transparent governance system, then I think we are achieving the same results under a different name.
My experience is something very similar. Do we have other questions from the floor to Dr. Nabi and Dr. Sarkis?
Fellow Lebanese, immigrant Lebanese, and friends of Lebanon. In this presentation, I address the road to financial reform in Lebanon. Two other reforms are required: structural reform and political reform. I leave that discussion to another day. Lebanon's economic body is sick A radical political economic surgery is required. Lebanon will not die, but many of its people will suffer, and some may die. Time does not allow us to wait. The people of Lebanon are calling on us to act. I am an eternal optimist. That is why I am here to speak to you about a solution to the financial crisis in Lebanon. I have always taken calculated risk. I prevailed because faith in God, family, and country, right here. Yes, I took chances. I left Lebanon. But Lebanon never left me. There is no doubt that the economic situation in Lebanon is extreme and very troubling. The good news is that it can be fixed, and it must be, especially if the immigrant Lebanese are tapped for the rescue. Those that failed to solve the impasse thus far should step aside and let us do the work. It is time for action. Enough excuses. The Lebanese people have suffered enough. The international Lebanese community is set to help Lebanon in all kinds of ways, but internal Lebanese politics always interfered. The immigrant Lebanese and their descendants have vested Lebanon with incredible capitals. Economic capital, political capital, entrepreneurial capital, emotional capital, intellectual capital, global trading capital, cultural and religious capitals, knowledge capitals, capital, and so on. In fact, there is no way for the citizens of Lebanon to live the way they do without these vested capitals. Allow me for a moment to reflect on a recent experience that could be very educational for us. And these are lessons from Greece to show that bad economic policies based largely on political consideration always fail and are costly. Lebanon is no exception. In studies I read recently, the authors discussed the foundational problem of Greece that was almost expelled from the European Union. Its people suffered massively, but the fog seems to have largely lifted. Their similarities with Lebanon case are startling. During the Papandreou regime, the people of Greece were classified as, believe it or not, forces of light and forces of darkness. That did not help because all the people of Greece were needed to pull together to solve the problems. I share with you the documented causes of the failure of Greece. 4 years after the housing crisis in 2008, starting in earnest in 2010, Greece was suffering from staggering unemployment, budgetary cut that exacerbated poverty, populism and violence in the street, massive budget deficits, and large price increases. The status in the EU became questionable in the least. Do they all sound familiar to you? Here are the underlying causes of the Greek tragedy. 1. Corruption. The culprit were immune in effect from prosecution. Intense competition, almost ruinous, among the political parties. The New Democracy, Pan-Hellenic Socialist Movement, and the Stalinist Communist Party. Yes, I have one. Every party wanted to protect its interests and ideology, while the country burned. Everything was considered a zero-sum game. Teachers' union and other unions resisting any change. Let the other guy make the sacrifice. No structural reform. A massive welfare state driven by populism. The welfare state increased by 50%. Pension and healthcare costs were the highest in Europe, 11.5% of GDP. Patronage and cronyism throughout the political landscape. Falsification of public finance data and over-optimistic tax projection, while tax evasion was rampant. All deficits were borrowed, of course. The elements of a proposed solution were predictable. Raising taxes, cutting government spending, debt restructuring, structural reforms. Looking at the broader picture within the EMU, we could also learn some lessons that Lebanon could benefit from. The EMU, as some of you may know, started on January 1st, 1999. Its currency, the euro, was thought to become a tremendous challenge to the dominance of the US dollar. The two currencies have since managed to coexist. Now it is the currency of 19 countries guided by the convergence criteria. All member countries will have similar economic policies guided by three major elements: fiscal discipline, a unified monetary policy controlled by the ECB, and one single currency. Every one of the 19 countries must have that currency, Germany included, despite its massive value of its currency within Europe, that is the Deutschmark. In this context, dollarization is not such a new idea. Now, some of the broad macroeconomic benefits were institutional credibility. Everybody right now has the ECB, and everybody now has the euro. Totally open markets, free trade, especially across all EU countries. The intent is to develop a unified, well-integrated Europe with mobility of goods, services, labor, and capital across all member countries. I believe that the EMU fiscal and monetary requirement structures are very important to understand dollarization and its twin brother, the currency board. Either is a solution for the Lebanese crisis. On the fiscal side, each country was expected to meet the following budget constraints: 3% of GDP annual budget deficit, and 60% cumulative budget over time. In addition, EMU members must also harmonize in order to maximize growth as per the Lisbon Agenda. The EMU internal market is based on the mobility of goods, labor, capital, and services. Harmonization requirement must cover product liability, health standards regulation, laws, public decision-making procedures. I'm sure Mr. Idris will add to the concerns about meeting international standards and convention in a successful trade strategy for Lebanon. On the monetary side, as I mentioned, 19 countries can pursue their own economic policies and budget policies, but they are all committed to a single common monetary policy. All EMU countries, including Germany, gave up their own currency and permanently adopted the euro. Therefore, the EMU is based on the complete loss of the exchange rate as an adjustment mechanism for any member countries, and the elimination of an independent monetary policy. Monetary policy would be conducted by the ECB. So now the currencies, all of them are linked, and their values against one another is considered, is called the grid. And that grid is irrevocable. Means from now until forever, that's how the grid will be. Means the currency value in terms of each of the other currencies, and so on and so forth. Now, I believe that a currency board will achieve similar results for a lone country called Lebanon. The results, incidentally, will not be much different from those achieved with dollarization. First, a quick review of the causes of the economic crisis in Lebanon. The balance of payment deficits, especially the current account deficit, and the budget deficits, that means the government budget deficits, are the twin towers that never cease to irritate and threaten the economic health of Lebanon. It is typically the case that these deficits were covered by capital flows, remittances, very important, flows associated with direct investment, external borrowing when in crisis, and use of accumulated dollar reserves in the central bank. There is no way the Lebanese economy can function and keep up the standard of living of the Lebanese without these capital inflows. The solvency of the Lebanese state, unfortunately, depended on massive borrowing from overseas, funded in part by immigrants. The total debt of Lebanon reached $85 billion, 150% of GDP, by the end of 2019, and it appears that there was no end in sight as it continued to grow. Lebanon borrows to pay deficit, to pay the debt due, and to pay interest on the debt. They didn't generate enough money to pay the interest on the debt. Lebanon witnessed massive changes in its economic performance. Let's look at them. Foreign deposits almost stopped. Remittances fell massively from 18% of GDP to 12.5%. Export of goods and services fell. Net foreign direct investment fell from 9.87% of GDP in 2010 to 2.4% of GDP in 2018. By 2019, there was a massive exodus of dollars from the banking system. The Financial Times estimated the loss of about $16 billion. By 2021, the economic position of Lebanon became precarious. As more borrowing was not possible, the alternatives were default and printing money, producing a massive depreciation in the value of the Lebanese currency and a substantial reduction in the welfare of the Lebanese people. Lebanon became a hyperinflation country. I therefore propose a currency board. The currency board is similar to the gold standard, with a solid internationally recognized currency as a substitute for gold. In our case, we're talking about the dollar. That currency serves as an anchor to the domestic currency instead of the gold. The currency in circulation, that is the Lebanese lira or pound, and reserves held by banks against time and demand deposits will be backed by foreign currency reserves. The CB managers, typically 3 to 5, will set the exchange rate between the anchor currency and the domestic currency. Strong legislation and economic institution will prevent CB managers from trying to influence the monetary base. The monetary base is composed of two parts, currency in circulation and bank reserves. It does not include non-cash assets such as demand deposits, time deposits, or checks. And they cannot change the exchange rate. CB managers cannot change the exchange rate. Now the mechanics and the implication of a CB. Clearly, my reference typically when I talk about CB is Estonia. They call it the Baltic Tiger. Incredibly successful economy, and they adopted the currency board in 1992. I was part of a group that actually was in Estonia, and I worked with a fantastic human being who has since died, Velo Venso. It was a great experiment. The sole objective of a CB is to maintain a fixed, stable exchange rate against an anchor currency. The anchor currency in our case is the US dollar. All the local currency and demand deposits will be redeemed at the current exchange rate. Means the exchange rate decided upon by the CB managers. There'll be no discretionary monetary policy to influence inflation or unemployment. This is in direct contrast to a central bank that can change monetary policy based on the judgment of the decision makers. Under an orthodox CB system, orthodox meaning that all of the banking assets and the currency will be covered fully. Unorthodox will mean that fewer assets are used for covering those. The one we are discussing here is the orthodox. The CB will hold assets in the foreign currency to back all of the country's monetary liabilities in circulation, notes, coins, and demand deposits. What are the unique characteristics of a CB? No need for banks to hold minimum level of reserves. The frequency and magnitude of net withdrawals are estimated and the level of reserve is set. They will then exchange domestic currency for foreign assets. There is no lender of last resort. Interest rates are not manipulated to maintain a policy rate. I repeat, interest rates are not manipulated to maintain a policy rate. The CB does not lend to government or to commercial bank. Governments will raise money through taxation or through borrowing. They cannot print money to raise funds as Lebanon is doing now. Inflation is linked to the inflation rate of the other country, that is the US in the dollar case. Interest rate will be similar to those in the other country, else arbitrage will take place. In other words, instead of borrowing domestically, it may benefit you to borrow internationally or in the country of the base currency. CB earns revenue from interest on foreign assets it holds, including securities and bank deposits. And they incur annual expenses which are minimal. They're about 1% of the assets of the CB. The central bank will perform a supervisory function and will make sure that honest individuals are running the bank. Now, how does Lebanon get the anchor currency, the dollar in our case? Only a dramatic, comprehensive approach executed in all of its elements, and I've discussed that extensively with Mr. Idris, they must be implemented simultaneously, will rescue the Lebanese economy. Here's what Lebanon must do to earn the needed US dollars to run a successful economy. First, dramatically change the reliance on traditional export, like olive oil and small manufacturing. Lebanon must rely going forward on export with high intellectual capital, starting with artificial intelligence. Its citizens have the training, the education, and the will for it. The opportunity must be created for them, especially the new university graduates who are leaving Lebanon in large numbers. It's very distressing to see that. Lebanon has massive gas reserves and considerable oil reserves. Their exploration and production must be the highest priority of the government. The schemes developed to freeze the government and the broader population from the benefits of oil and gas reserves must be trashed and their perpetrators exposed. At a minimum, Lebanon will save $5 billion in oil import bills. Lebanon will become quickly a net exporter of energy. This alone can cover the deficit in the current accounts. The additional benefits, of course, are environmental in character. In China, practically every taxi I took was powered by gas, natural gas. In Ukraine and many other countries, gas right now is replacing gasoline. The third source of dollars are remittances. Lebanon has a large number of immigrants that have settled all over the world. Early in 2000s, they accounted at one time, for as high as 20% of GDP. That is, remittances accounted for 24% of GDP. There are about 20 million Lebanese residing in almost every country in the world. Their financial success in some cases has been legendary. Carlos Slim of Mexico, the richest man in the world for 40 years. It's just one notable Lebanese success story. Carlos Ghosn is another, and so many more. A stable fixed exchange rate will help the flow of funds into Lebanon. In all cases, there are risk returns that the investor must take into consideration. For any investment in Lebanon cannot be based on sentimental reasons. The investor has risk and return to consider. That investor could invest anywhere in the world. To choose Lebanon, the risk-return trade-off must be sensible, especially now that the currency board takes the exchange rate away. There's no foreign exchange risk in Lebanon. So people are looking at the returns and the possibility of defaults and so on and so forth. For foreign direct investment in Lebanon, Lebanon needs to clean up its image as an inefficient country with high level of corruption and a terrible infrastructure. I was in Lebanon recently. We had electricity for 1 hour and a half. How could that possibly be good for the Lebanese people or for international investors? The author knows of numerous cases where deals were canceled because of the level of abuse and the required size of the payoffs to official and property owners. All basic services in Lebanon are expensive. Electricity, water, telephone, cellular phone services, and fees of all type. The last major source of dollars is tourism. Lebanon has traditionally gotten a good share of world tourism. It was often been described as the Paris of the Middle East. I think it was better than Paris, but that's another point. Beautiful countryside and beaches, elegant shops, dynamic culture, high-end entertainment, and simply a fantastic cuisine covering most cultures have attracted millions of tourists. However, its beaches are now polluted, the streets are not as clean, the air is suffocating during traffic congestions, and its political divisions are too transparent and project poorly and what is considered a historically superior culture. With so many countries competing for tourist dollars, Lebanon is not winning. I hope I have convinced you that the solution is possible and that we must act, and we must act now. The situation in Lebanon is simply intolerable. I spent 3 weeks in Lebanon. I could not believe what is happening. Please refer to my recently published book, Lebanon at the Brink, for further documentation and analysis. You can download it on my website, or you could buy it from Amazon or from other sources. My website is www.theconservativeedge, one word, theconservativeedge.com. Thank you. I will be delighted to take questions later, but for now, please accept my thanks for listening to my presentation and hopefully for thinking about it critically. May Lebanon survive at that greatest of countries. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. We will start on with the rest of the presentation. We will move to our next session with Mr. Atif Idris. Mr. Atif Idris is the CEO of Mefosa, board member of Idris Holdings, and is the founding president of SLFI, Lama, LAFST, and Land. Mr. Atif Idris will be talking about the role of the food industry. On the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manal. Before I start in addressing the presentation of today, I'd like to remind all that Lebanon ratified several treaties in the early 1990s. One of the treaties is the Euromed Treaty, where we approved and planned on executing a set of protocols that will be addressing international standards. We are no longer in our Euromed hat addressing issues of simple Lebanese or Arab trade. We have presented in 1994 our commitment to our international partners to address our business with them at par with WTO standards, the World Trade Organization, and we approved and committed to address Euromed opportunities and prerequisites. These are better presented in an earlier PowerPoint that I had prepared. I will run through it very quickly. That PowerPoint was related to trade and the ability to address trade at international practices. I will go very quickly through this PowerPoint for 5 minutes just to bring you before on what we committed to do. And our commitments then were not to export any food with any disease in it, to better comply with all the requirements of ISO and International Trade Organization requirements. Second slide. The trade then requested that also we address a regional structure within the GAFTA, the Greater Arab Free Trade Area, in promoting not only food security but food safety, and in linking agriculture to health, in linking our food exports to food safety, and in linking all that to sustainable development, to opportunities related to better compliance with environmental protocols like Kyoto, and related issues where we at that time declared as the Lebanese Association of Food Science and Technology our commitment to facilitating not only international trade but at par with Codex, which is all the microbial and the chemical and compliance with our commitments to the Euromed Treaty. In our regional trade, we also committed to do that according to international standards, where we will be able to understand that certain pathogens start with food, sometimes with rice and vegetables. We export Bacillus cereus, or if we are producing foods that have Clostridium preferentius, we might end up with a disease and cramps and diarrhea. And with Staph aureus, which can exist in dairy products and in pasta, we can cause other diseases. So we are committed to export our tahini with no salmonella, or our meat with no Camelobacter. These are some of the issues that we need to test before export, so that we are able to commit to our trade and then in the region and across the Mediterranean region. We have been controlling this through time, yet we have not been able to better address it regionally and within our chambers of commerce, because we keep on thinking that we can import our money or our deficits without really building our economy, from crop production, from better fish farming or meat production, across the value chain and supply chains that Dr. Fahad talked about. We need to better comply with packaging and distribution and retailing of our foods, and of course of our consumption. Some of these issues are also related not only to environmental concerns, but to consumer concerns. Protecting our consumer is at core. And in the 2020 vision that we had been looking at, we looked at our agriculture and food safety that is transmitting across local values, but also according to international standards to our export markets and diaspora. These are some of the background issues that we committed at. And of course, the Codex Alimentarius is part of WTO, the World Trade Organization, where FAO and WHO presented to the international community an agreement on WTO that was ratified across nations. And even in our Arab region, we are doing a creation of similar organizations that will be controlling food safety within the GAFTA area, and we will be addressing all these internationally. Finally, it is important for us all to understand that agriculture starts in the farmland. It has to be controlled by local authorities and municipalities that are controlling the Bekaa Valley or controlling Akkar, or better addressing the water in our Litani River. And we might make sure that if the industries comply with all this, we can stop the food insecurity and the poverty, and we can create jobs in the rural areas. If I come back to the main presentation that I have for today, you will realize that building up a rural economy, building up a food security is at the core of what we're doing. Yet we need to do that in an economy, in an industry that is congruent to safety, environmental safety, as well as biosafety and food safety, of course. And the more we understand the linkages of the industry and the economy and retailing of food, the more we understand why we sometimes need to look at BRC. BRC is the British Retail Consortium that requires of retailers to make sure the food they sell in their supermarkets is clean and environmentally applicable, that farm production and food processing are congruent to consumer health, and retailers are tracking all this so that food trade through retail and through supermarkets is protecting consumers. Export is also an issue that we need to address in a circular economy, because the more we export, the better earnings we get in hard currencies that could be reinvented or reinvested, in our food production, in our farming, and in our industry. The challenges and constraints in agriculture are circular, because from the export earnings we bring in the fresh dollars that will help us to mechanize, that will help us to grow our exports according to food safety requirements, and will help us to put forward EU compliance schemes, so that the compliance of health is not only within Europe but with its trading partners. The trading partners in European neighborhood region are sometimes Turkey, but they definitely include Lebanon or include Egypt. And I'm amazed that a country like Morocco is doing much better than Lebanon in compliance with EU exports. So the export and trade in the Mediterranean basin could be a circular related economy, where we're importing some of their technologies, we're exporting our foods and our agriculture, but we're also exporting, like Dr. Sarkis said, our high intellectual property products. And we are implementing our traceability solutions that are required by law. The more we're able to put the intellectual property, branding, and all related trade schemes within our circular economy, the more we're able to export value-added food products. We can export our apples at $250 a ton, but if we want to export apple pectin, we can export it at $2,000 a ton. We're throwing our apples without really investing in our agriculture. We are processing simple products without putting value-added branding and trademark protection on our national exports, because we have not signed our intellectual property and WIPO agreements. So the circular economy can be beneficial if we are able to understand what are the pillars that are building in that economy. This will help us reduce the pressure on the environment in our country, but will help our exporters understand the risk behind exporting foods that are grown in areas with high contamination of the Litani River. Increasing competitiveness will allow brands to develop better and to be concerned by a client that is not buying only our chickpeas, but our branded hummus, or buying our branded food products. Boosting economic growth needs not only stimulating innovation with current industries, but with startup industries that are using more technology and are able to expand their products circularly within the region. Can you expand this? The circular economy, of course, is an economy that can help tourism. Helping tourism will allow for all of us to understand that products can grow within our tourists who are able to visit our economy, who are able to understand how we can build villages and touristic sites that are environmentally protected, that are environmentally sustainable, but at the same time we're producing within these regions a good experience of the Lebanese culture, of the Lebanese, if you wish, environment that we look at. Finally, it is important for all of us to understand that to help intensify our economy, we need to unify some of the practices that we are opening. That will help us to understand how we can build a unified terminology of agricultural development, a development that will address not only quality and safety, but also good laboratory practices or good manufacturing practices or good agricultural practices. So we have a complete package that is sustainable, that will help our rural areas to develop, but can earn good returns on investment in our agriculture. The requirements of compliance with the Codex and with ISO, and particularly ISO 14000 or ISO 323, which is the circular economy, aims to recover issues related to public procurement, to production and distribution, as well as to wider areas such as end of life and behavioral changes in societies, understanding when we are witnessing refugee problems and trying to get our refugees at par with our economic and social integration, but at the same time, our ability to look at a footprint of energy and the footprint of social development and an index that is comparable to our region and comparable to the world. Dr. Sarkis Khouri explained how Greece went through all kinds of problems and because they were unable to look at their international standards and European standards. Our recommendations here are to look at not only the agricultural policies that we need to look at, but at the same time compare these policies to regional policies and international policies, so we are able to do a circular economy at par with a progressive realization of the right to food. We are an economy that supposedly is advanced, and people are unable to access their foods because of monetary issues. We've lived through 1 year where nobody knows if he buys a package of bread, if he will have 1 kilogram or 1 kilogram and a half or 1 kilogram 200 grams. Every time the Ministry of Economy is switching standards, this is unacceptable. The right to food is of prominence here. Food security and rural development and institutional reforms are needed. And like Dr. Sarkis and Dr. Fahd insisted, the issue is not in day-to-day fixes as much as in stabilizing an economy, stabilizing exchange rates, stabilizing a dollar value, and at the same time stabilizing a currency board that can give us an ability to address agricultural policies. Thank you.
We will start with our next session with Professor Michel. Professor Michel Nasser is a medical doctor. He is the fellow of the American Heart Association and the Council of Vascular Sciences. He is also the president of the Lebanese Association for Nutrition Development and the founder of the Lebanese Overseas University. Professor Michel will be presenting and possible solutions. Professor Michel, the floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, I want to say that I'm very pleased to bring my modest contribution to this important webinar. I want to tell the audience to start with that the population of Lebanon is not 4 million. The population of Lebanon is 19 million, which includes, therefore, the Lebanese diaspora. And I'm pleased to hear what Professor Sarkis Khouri said. And at the end of my talk, I want to make a message to the Lebanese diaspora, and I will put it in the custody of Professor Sarkis Khouri. Today, I will be talking briefly about Lebanon current challenges, and I will try to describe briefly the challenges, how we reached there, and possibly some preliminary solutions. Lebanon used to be the intellectual capital of the Arab East and the ideal place for maximum flowering and pluralism. I say pluralism. This is how the writer Amin Malouf, one of Beirut's most celebrated sons, has described the city of Beirut as it was in the 1960s. Amin Malouf was right. Lebanon is unique in that Lebanese Muslims and Christians have lived together for the last 1,000 years without interruption. They had ups and downs in their relationship, but they managed to stay together. In every Christian, there is something of Islam, and in every Muslim, there is something of Christianism. This society makes of Lebanon a mini-globalized country. We are a mini-globalized country at the time when the planet Earth is becoming a great village. In Lebanon, the Islamic Christian consensus is a source of universal strength. Pope John Paul II called Lebanon a country mission. So therefore, I want to say that Lebanon is a jewel. Lebanon is a jewel, and everything must be done to preserve its perenniality. But at this point, Lebanon needs help. What about the état des lieux and the challenges that Lebanon is facing? At the beginning of August 2020, much of the Lebanese capital was razed by a huge explosion at its port. What is known so far suggests that the tragedy was the result of repeated negligence on the part of a large number of civil servants. While to date, there is no evidence of criminal action. Repeated negligence could be coined as criminal negligence anyway, and this will be directly linked to the country's political sclerosis. The Beirut explosion signaled generalized incompetence and a criminal laissez-aller. Given the evident government impotence, it indicates that it is just the tip of the iceberg. We should hope, however, that the shock caused by the August 4 explosions will cause a new political earthquake, one that incites the Lebanese authorities to lead a credible, specifically targeted investigation. We need, in fact, the kind of political earthquake that at least prompts Lebanese leaders to start erasing the financial mess they have created. I must confess, however, that I do not have much hope. In 2016, Pope Francis made a statement to the effect that corruption is habit-forming. Since it is habit-forming, it needs more than just the will. What makes it worse is the fact that our leaders, our political leaders, do not appear even to have the will for change. The only solution left is to take them off their positions of responsibility. Actually, before this horrific explosion in the port of Beirut, financial collapse, de facto currency devaluation, coronavirus, soaring poverty rates, food insecurity, and much more were in progress. Lebanon was already experiencing a deep economic and financial crisis, its greatest crisis in decades, which prompted a wave of protest in October 2019 against political deadlock and against systemic corruption. But those protests quickly lost sight of their goal. Since then, things have gone from bad to worse. Presently, more than 50% of Lebanese live below the poverty line. This is an alarming sign. The United Nations World Food Programme estimates that the price of food in Lebanon rose by 109% between October 2019 and June 2020. To this must be added the effects of COVID-19, which were aggravated by the chaos that resulted from the explosion. Moreover, Lebanon has the world's largest number of refugees per capita. Today, more than 30% of the population. The UN has warned that in a few weeks, 4 million people won't have access to safe water, including almost 2 million refugees. Food prices have in some instances gone up sixfold. There is pretty much no man's power at this point. 3/4 of the country do not have enough food or money to buy food. This reminds me that in the whole world, about 1 billion people suffer from hunger. And they suffer from hunger not because of lack of food. They suffer of hunger because of poverty. So we are reaching the same way in Lebanon. The country has been pushed to the brink by what the World Bank has said is one of the most extreme economic collapses in the past 150 years. Therefore, given the current dreadful situation, we must make sure that Lebanon does not become the staging ground for an inter-regional conflict. War would be a disaster. This would be the worst-case scenario for Lebanon. This point, I am mentioning this point as a message to the major powers who have a stake in regional stability. Few words about the Taif Accord. The most serious crisis, the 1975-1990 civil war, was ended with the Taif Accord. In fact, the country never turned the page on that bloody chapter of Lebanon's history. The same warlords kept up and going, and even strengthened their power. They allowed opposing factions to encourage extremist identities and perpetuate hostilities, because by doing so, they would give them free rein to pursue their extractive policies. Factional warlords used the Taif Agreement to enlarge their power base and to exercise strict patronage over their constituencies. In effect, the Taif Agreement only slightly modified the confessional quota system that had prevailed in the country's public bodies. But it abolished checks and balances and made the country ungovernable. The Taif Agreement hindered effective governance and made the construction of national identity a mission impossible. As we know it, peace agreements must end violence, but this one didn't, because either it was ill-planned or it was meant to be as is. In parallel to these pitfalls, Lebanese politicians have shown to be destructive to any functional democracy. When I was an advisor to the President of the Republic of Lebanon, I was always impressed with his care and concern for all the people. He focused his attention on the vulnerable, and he went out of his way to exercise proper governance whenever a social problem was brought to his attention. He would ask me to take care of an issue, and he would ask for frequent follow-ups on progress. He was compassionate while fully aware of his obligations under the Constitution. So what do we need? We need, first of all, a national dialogue at the rescue of governance. A national dialogue is always necessary, but it is not a substitute for policy making and decision making. Since the Taif Agreement, too much time has been lost in dialogue. The political landscape in Lebanon has produced a situation conducive to stalemates and inaction. This is because, according to the Lebanese constitution, in order to pass any law, a 2/3 majority is needed. So if the opposition is in the government, deadlocks are likely to occur. In this case, unity governments like the current one run the risk of being unproductive, and they are. Hardship, which is common now to almost everyone, has been the ferment for a general demand for reforms. Both hardship and the demand for reforms have been strongly cohesive and unifying. Protesters are calling for a complete overhaul of the system. Lebanon's situation demands that the West listen with humility and firmly support the genuine, lawful demands of the people. At present, I'm convinced that the ideal for my mother country, and for others as well, does not reside expressly in a quota system, which encloses society in a perverse logic, nor in the negation of the differences which are always present in Lebanon. If we delay the negation of the differences, we will only mask the problems and often will aggravate those same differences. What is at stake is the very survival of the nation, its prosperity, its place in the world, and its civil peace. Overall, therefore, this requires that competent people be placed where they belong. This is so far a mission impossible. We need to develop a national comprehensive plan, a national comprehensive development plan, as we revise our social and economic policies to address, for example, poverty eradication, ensure the generation of decent work opportunities, and adopt a universal social protection system based on the democratic rights of people, all people. The building of national citizenship is a cornerstone in this Lebanon state. The proper governance is a key parameter in addressing the issue of citizenship. People in charge of making decisions on national issues should transcend above their own beliefs, above their own political or religious belonging. People elected to parliament through the democratic process must be endowed with specific qualifications determined by a panel of experts in democratic governance. In Lebanon, given that corruption has plagued the nation for so long, perhaps those candidates to public office should be asked to make certain commitments prior to qualifying for the office. We should aim at resolving conflicts of national dimension through dialogue. Characteristically, governments have failed so far their obligations to the nation and its citizens. Mechanisms for problem identification and decision-making must be well defined. I underscore the importance of a governance system that effectively serves its citizens. An all-inclusive dialogue is a constitutional imperative. It has been attempted with not much success at every point in Lebanese history. If we can define problems accurately, address them objectively, and with a national sense of awareness, national dialogues will be more effective, specifically with regard to decision making. The priority of an inclusive national dialogue agenda is and state building should go hand in hand. In a state, particularly a fractured one, which needs national reconciliation, we must have strong institutions. We must have strong institutions to protect its sovereignty. The West, in particular, the US and France, has a broad historic responsibility that includes encouraging effective governance systems in Lebanon and the rest of the region. But all too often, however, it has not been equal to this task. It has resorted to interventionist excesses and paternalistic attitudes and its overall desire to assert control. But the West no. Okay. I spoke to you earlier about a message which I want to convey to the Lebanese diaspora. Lebanese are everywhere in the world. They are widespread. They are all talented. They are all powerful. They are creative. They are innovators. And therefore, Lebanese diaspora should be able at this point to step in and work for the salvation of Lebanon, their motherland. Okay. As I was brainstorming on this webinar, it came to my mind that two participants to this webinar, Professors Khoury and Shaheen, like many other Lebanese in Lebanon and in the world, belong to a wide plethora of talents. Talented Lebanese throughout the world have never been structured to form a unified energy in the service of Lebanon in a coordinated manner. Or why not? They have never been structured to form an international consensus dedicated to and in the service of world peace and justice. In a sense, I consider that this is virtually nothing, that there is nothing virtually that Lebanese cannot do. For this reason, I am calling today on the Lebanese throughout the world to organize in specialized groups with affiliate members who have common denominators and or denominations or express common interests and concerns. Members of a given group shall coalesce and engage in specific issues depending on their field of expertise, social, economic, development, etc., you name it, nutritional, academic, etc. In a coordinated effort in Lebanon and abroad. In effect, what I'm talking about is some form of an organization which I will tentatively coin World Lebanese Agency that will be different from and won't be a duplication of the current efforts aimed at mobilizing the Lebanese diaspora. I am pleased to share with you that I am currently concocting other plans designed to strengthen the true image of Lebanon and, by the same token, foster its perenniality. At this point, the country is facing two milestones: the centennial of its founding and, in the near future, the first returns from the country's natural gas reserves. Here, I want to make a point that may appear controversial, but I'm going to make it. If Lebanon sees a huge influx of money from oil reserves into a government that continues to be dysfunctional and corrupt, I am afraid reforms will never be taken place. They will always be put off indefinitely. We need, therefore, to keep the distress on the population, the stressful situation, so people keep up the pressure. My message today is for the President of Lebanon and the international community to wait for strong and clear evidence of reforms. That reforms are well on their way before those natural gas reserves are allowed to pour in money. Meanwhile, however, we don't stop. We must keep Lebanon's stability by pouring in humanitarian aid and target it where it is specifically needed. Thank you.
We have 5 minutes now to take your questions.
My question, Manal, if I may, how can we build all this together into an integrated plan, a plan that can help our exports move to international markets? And we have with us Dr. Bassam and Nous from the US, who is always looking at compliance with USDA standards. And we have with us Mr. Imad Fawaz, who's exporting all kinds of food products to Iraq and regionally. Can we develop an integrated approach where through all these issues we can maybe take our retail industry to open up regionally, export our produce within our retail markets, and to do that, can Dr. Sarkis Khoury better address how we're going to manage stabilizing our currency with a board that can be functional? My question is open to all and anybody who would like to pitch in from the audience. Dr. Bassam Anous, do you have any input on all this? Bassam, are you there? Mr. Imad Fawaz, can you give us your input on this?
We are having serious technology issues here, especially with the voice.
I can hear you very well. Please continue, Dr. Khoury. We can hear you much better now. It seems you have a better internet.
Well,
so how do you see this happening?
Okay, wait. The European Union, as I mentioned in my presentation, had to go through a tremendous amount of harmonization. Each country of each of the 19 countries, and even the larger ones, in other words, if you look at the EU level or the EMU level, there was tremendous amount of harmonization to take place. And the harmonization was across product liability, health standard, regulations, and public decision-making, and the various laws affecting each of the exporting countries. The idea here is very important, that if the European Union had to harmonize, imagine how much Lebanon has to harmonize, because many of the products that were being exported by Lebanese exporters were not at the standard, at the required international standards. In fact, some of them were deliberately intended to circumvent the international regulation. What Mr. Atif said was extremely important. We have to play by the international rules. We cannot make them. Lebanon is too small a country. We are in every respect. So whatever we export could only be to limited market under very specific regulations. Therefore, I suggest that Mefosa will make sure that everybody obeys the rules, and everybody tries to have an input in the rulemaking, in fact, if in fact they want them to be changed. Now, as to the necessity of exports, you could produce a single item, for example, something like WhatsApp. When WhatsApp was proposed to Facebook, they said, no, we are not really interested. Facebook ended up buying it. This is a product produced by two people. Facebook ended up buying it for $4 billion. Now just think about that. Today, what is really working in the place, we could develop all kinds of applications of all kinds of technologies. But what is important is the traditional export cannot be ignored, and they must be fortified in order to meet international standard. This is the message of Mr. Atif. We must fortify in order to meet, not to circumvent, international standard. Now, as far as the other thing is, they don't require much investment, the AI. I mean, many of our college graduates could really do all kinds of applications for all kinds of games, for all kinds of accounting applications, for all kinds of teaching methods, and so on and so forth. These are not beyond the capacity of the Lebanese, and these will constitute incredible exports. Furthermore, if you really want to use the talent of the Lebanese could come to help you develop the software, all kinds of software, all kinds of new brilliant ideas like WhatsApp, but they're not going to come to work the land. So therefore, to take advantage of the Lebanese living overseas, we have to have a connection that is very technological in character. Very technological in character. Yes, that could help you mechanize and that could help you produce high yield products, but ultimately it's going to be about using the new trends in the marketplace, and they are mostly driven by artificial intelligence.
Dr. Khoury, this
Thank you,
region,
Dr. Safias. Thank you.
if I may, Manal, ask another question.
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Khoury, this region imports $100 billion a year in food, and a lot of it is imported. 94% is imported from outside the region. How can we, with the use of technology, better deliver the last mile of our foods from, say, Lebanese retail to every household in the region? Can we open up through improved technologies the delivery of fresh, safe food to a household in Khobar, for example, Saudi Arabia, or to a country that is opening up like Sudan? How do you think IT technology could reinforce our exports to replace more than $95 billion worth of food that is being imported from everywhere and anywhere, and most of it is not compliant to food safety?
Well, I think this, with all due respect, I think Mr. Idris is probably the biggest expert on this issue. And he said something that really caught my attention. Instead of selling them hummus, maybe we should sell them, the byproducts of hummus. Instead of selling them batinjane, maybe we should sell them baba ganoush. So packaging and meeting international standard and make sure the quality of the food is very high and very reasonably priced, I think is extremely important. However, that is really not my agricultural expert. It's not really my domain. But what he said makes so much sense to me. While I'm talking, I would like to endorse what the good doctor said about the political and sociological dimension of the problem. I cannot agree with you more, doctor, and I'm very proud of what you said.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Khoury. Definitely, we are going to need a revolution, really, some form of a social revolution, whereby people are educated into doing what is right for themselves, independent of their belongings, religious, social, or whatever. This can be done only through education, through university education. Our schools, for the time being, are not fulfilling any role like this. Our people, most of our people, do not cater to objectivity in their doings. We have lost a lot of people in Lebanon, but we are left with a lot of good people too. This country is exceptional. I'm really amazed. Physicians leave the country. There are still plenty of physicians who stay. IT people leave the country. There are still a lot of IT people What we really need, therefore, is a government of people, for the people. Many politicians in Lebanon right now, or most of the people in the so-called revolution, speak of changing the system. I want to say something that can appear controversial. The system has nothing to do with the performance of the system. The people who man the system are the ones responsible for the performance of the system. You can take the best system in the world, put over it bandits, corrupt people. They will destroy the system. You can put an average, a mediocre system, put honest to God people, people who are competent. Competent means that they know what they are doing, they target what they are doing, they define what they are doing, and they execute what they plan. This system will also be successful. So the problem is not the system. The problem is our political leaders who have grabbed the country and they don't want to let go. My problem is that the people of this country have been electing the same people for the last 30 years or more. And these people have been stealing them. They have been mistreating them, and yet they re-elect them. We have a democratic system. We cannot get out of this. We have to go through elections. So I think the challenge at this point for people like myself and for you, Dr. Khoury, for Atif, for everybody else, is to educate people quickly so that they become aware of what they are supposed to do. This is not done so far. One positive point about this is that people are suffering now. People are suffering tremendously. We are talking about 95% of the population. When people suffer, they improve, they get better. So hopefully they get better, and in the next election, they will choose the right people. Meanwhile, what can we do? Meanwhile, I think the international community, the Lebanese diaspora, I want to make sure that we talk about the Lebanese diaspora, about 15 million people in the world. Meanwhile, the Lebanese diaspora should step in and help the Lebanese surmount the current difficulties. At the same time, I think we need to have people to educate the people, educate them on TV shows, in schools, universities, in social society groups, etc., so that they make the right choice. Democracy is a free and informed choice. If it's only free and not informed, it's not democracy. If it's informed and not free, it's not democracy. So we need to inform the people, therefore, so that we can really implement democracy in this country. We have had a democracy for ages, for centuries. The Lebanese have always voted for something. Whether they did the right way or not, they voted. And we need now to correct the way they vote. And this is not an impossible mission. We need your help for this. It is too much?
Thank you, everybody. Manal, the floor is back to you, unless Dr. Nabil Fahad will give us his closing statement, please. Any closing statement you'd like to address, Nabil? Manal?
No, thank you, Atif. I think it was very interesting, and I look forward if we can have another session. I would very gladly participate, and I thank you all for all your information and insights, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for this very fruitful discussion and for your intervention.
I
Of course, look
appreciate very
forward
much.
to further sessions,
Yeah.
and we hope you would be able to be with us.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Manal. I want to make a comment. I received a lot of comments that were not about the voice issue. A lot of people could not hear it very well. I could not hear many of the discussions, including my own. And I hope we will do this again, but make sure that the technology is as perfect as possible. And thank you very much for your effort.
Of course.
Thank you, Dr. Khoury. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.